Hey YouTube, this is Patrick, and I hope you guys are having a great day. Now, before we get started with this exciting episode, I want to take a moment to say thank you so much to my 1,000 plus subscribers. You guys have been awesome. For those of you who don't know, I was on a bit of a hiatus for a moment. I'm now back making a ton of videos. I have a lot of videos planned, but during that time, you guys have been so awesome with all the support, sending me all the comments with the thank yous and suggestions. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and jump into this. So this is going to be episode 1, which is going to be of our mix breakdown. And to get us started, we're going to go ahead and do Wage Wars Low. So let's go ahead and take a look. Now, the first thing I want to go ahead and say is to please go ahead and make sure to go in the description of this video and download the resource files. The resource files are going to contain 3 things. It's going to contain the multi-tracks, the MIDI, but also the Pro Tools session. And that gives you the most options available to be able to follow along with this if you're trying to replicate this song exactly as I have. So this gives people the ability, for those who do have the libraries I have, to be able to just use the MIDI. For those who don't, you can use the audio tracks instead. Or if you have all these plugins plus also Pro Tools, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get to open up this session and just see exactly what I did, and without even really having to follow along if you didn't want to. But you know, what's the fun in that? Stick around and watch to see what we got going on. So again, make sure to go to the description, download the files. They're going to be here in this video, and also if you happen to have the Wage War video available, it will also be in that as well. So thank you, and see you just a moment into the next part where we're going to go over the samples. All right, so to kick things off, no pun intended, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the kick track. And actually, before I actually really go into it, let's talk about these MIDI files really quickly. It's actually really important. So as you can see here, I have them broken up into the following tracks, all independently separated elements here. So we have the kick, the snare, the tom, the cymbals. Those are the 4 elements of the drums that we're using. Then we have bass, rhythm guitar. Let's go over here. We'll jump through it. Rhythm guitar, intro guitar, center guitar, violin, cello, choir, and then our drum. So those are the different elements that we're using that require the MIDI, all right? So back to what I was saying, this is going to be the kick drum right here. And for the kick drum, we're actually using Modern and Massive drums, which is going to be from Get Good Drums. So let's go ahead and take a listen what this sounds like. Now, mind you, as we're going through this, the track is going to start to get louder. So my voice might be loud, but the tracks might be quiet. So just make sure to keep that in mind. I will do my best to try to turn them up as much as I can during certain sections of the song, so that way you can hear what they sound like by themselves. But remember, as we progress, the tracks will get louder, so just a reminder to turn down your headphones. All right, so this is going to be the kick. Let's go ahead and hear this guy right here. Let me turn that up for you a little bit. Let's get our master here. All right, just trying to get that to play without it clipping. So, but as you can hear, it's a very solid kick sound. Again, this is a great library pack that you can get from Get Good Drums, Modern and Massive. So now that we've looked at that, let me return this back to 0. And let's look at the snare. Let me actually, we'll just jump over to the snare. So the snare, we're actually using 2 libraries from the same company. This is going to be a tight sound, and they have we are using the warm snare and also the metal snare 5. So let's take a listen what that sounds like now. All right, as you can hear there, I turned it up a little bit for you guys so that way you can hear what the sample sounds like on its own, but a great sounding snare, especially the 2 of them blended together. And let's jump over to our toms. I'm going to go over to this fill here. And this is also coming from Tight Sounds. This is from their Roomy kick. So I want to hear this now. Let me bring this up to like maybe 10 might be too much. Let's do like 6 dB. And let's hear it. Really great sounding toms. Obviously, you have the ambience of the room in there as well. Sounds really good. And let's go ahead and turn this back down to 0 before we forget. Cymbals. All right, cymbals. This is coming from the Dreaming Heavy Cymbals library. It sounds really good. We have an 18-inch China, a 16-inch crash, an 18-inch crash, and then it looks like we have a 14-inch hi-hat as well. Let's find a section here that we can play and listen to. I'm going to go, let's see. Let's try to do this section. I might do another section as well. And this is set to -11. Let's bring that to 0 for now and hear it. All right, and another section. That's just more China, but you get the idea. Really good sounding cymbals. You'll have a chance to hear a little bit of more of them later as we move on through the mix breakdown. Let me set that back down to 11. All right. And let's go over to bass. So for bass, we are using DjinnBass by Submission Audio. Submission Audio makes some really great stuff. They actually have more libraries that have came out since I actually did this mixing, or since I did this recreation of this song. If I were to do this again now, I might use one of their other libraries. Nothing against DjinnBass. It's excellent, sounds really good, but some of the other stuff that they put out, it sounds amazing, and I would probably try to use one of those other ones. But let's just hear what this sounds like on its own. I'm gonna turn this up to, let's say 6, and let's take a listen. Let's go louder than that. Let's try, I don't know, 12. Hopefully it won't clip. And it's hitting those low notes as well. It still sounds good. It's not getting too loose or crazy sounding. So let me drop that down to 0, and let's move on to our guitars. Now the guitars, I'm using all the same library. They're just different presets. So we have, again, our rhythm, intro, and clean. So starting with the rhythm, it's going to be a stereo pair of rhythm guitars, obviously, left and right side, and this is going to be Odin 2. If you guys don't know what Odin 2 is, Odin 2 is a fantastic library. It's compared to all the other libraries that are out there, not to say they're bad, they're good. This one sounds the most authentic and realistic to what an actual player sounds like. Is it going to completely replicate a professional player? No. This isn't going to be able to perfectly do things like polyphia and stuff, but for like rhythm guitars and for composers like me, this works perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and play just the DI and then play it again with also an amp sim, so that way you can hear what it sounds like dry and also with some sort of distortion on it. So let me go ahead and bring the volume of this to 0 for a moment, and let's take a listen. All right, and let's hear it with the amp sim. Now, we're not going to hear the rest of the other processing, but you'll be able to hear at least what it sounds like with the amp sound. I mean, to me, that sounds really good. Now, you have other options that you can use as well when it comes to using other amp sims and stuff. You can use things like, or not amp sims, excuse me, DI libraries. You can use things like Cabal, Shredded, and what's the other one? I'm trying to remember. I think it's, Heavier 7. That's the other one. That's another good one as well. However, this one tends to be my favorite. Sometimes I will use those other ones if I'm trying to get a little bit of a different sound for like leads and stuff. But that's just, this is just my go-to. Let's go ahead and look at the intro guitar really quickly. And let's, return the volume down. Intro guitar is also going to just be Odin again. But we're just using the Guitar 1 preset. I'm not going to bother with the DI since you had a chance to hear it with the other track. But let's hear what this sounds like with an amp sim and also this telephone guitar effect that I'm using. All right, and then let's go ahead and listen to our clean guitar. Again, this is also going to be Odin as well, but this is going to be the Guitar 2 preset. And for this one, I will go ahead and I'm just going to enable the all of the plugins here so that way we can hear what that sounds like. Let me also get rid of these other ones we're not using. All right, so this is what the clean guitar sounds like. Let's turn that up. All right, so you get the general idea of what we're going to be doing. And don't worry, I'm going to go through all of the presets and the settings that we're using. Right now, we're just focusing on the samples. So next is going to be violin. And let me just turn these volumes back up and down appropriately. So violin, we're using the Cinesample. This is going to be Taylor Davis library. Sounds really good. And let's take a listen to that. Sounds really, really nice. It's already got a concert hall reverb on it as well. You can adjust it accordingly however you would like to. Let's move on to our cello. Cello is going to be Cinesample's Tina. Let me pull that up here. There we go. There it is. And yeah. It's very quiet. Let me go ahead and raise this to like 5. Yep, another really good library that we are using here as well. Let me bring this back down to 0. Lower the volume back down again, and let's jump over to our choir. Choir, we're using the Arva Children. I love it a lot for especially choruses and stuff, or for, you know, bridges where maybe you have like some clean guitar tones, but you want to have some sort of pads, or, you know, some sort of long sustaining sounds. That sounds really good. So let me go ahead and crank this up to, let's do like 8. Do higher. Let's do 14. Yeah, I really like it a lot. And those elements are going to start coming together as we move along through the mix breakdown. So let me drop this back down to 0. I believe that's where it was. And then we're going to move on to our drone. So a drone, if you guys don't know what a drone is similar to like a pad. It's generally used a lot in the beginning intros of songs, or in bridges as well, where you want a little bit more ambience and kind of just this... just ambience in general, to kind of fill in this empty space where it's maybe a little bit too quiet, where maybe you have like a single guitar, but that on its own is just, you want to have a little bit more space with it. So this is going to be a library we're using called photosynthesis, and the reflection patch is what we're using for this sound. So let's take a listen to this. Let's turn this up. All right, it sustains for quite a while, but just to kind of show you how that plays together with the rest of the song, I'm going to go ahead and bring back this intro guitar. I've returned this back to its lower volume, so let's hear what it sounds like together. So as you can hear, it does a really good job of setting the tone, giving a bit of eeriness before the first notes of the guitar has actually played. So if you haven't considered using drones before, I highly suggest messing with them. Give it a try. It's actually really easy. I tend to use either the root note of the song, or do octaves on the root note. Just again, it sets even the key as well. All right, and that covers everything for our MIDI. The last thing I want to go over really quickly, it's not included in the MIDI, is going to be this bass drop. Now, the reason why is I'm not using any MIDI to trigger my bass drops. I'm actually creating them myself. So this song is in drop F. What I simply did was use something like a signal generator and got the root note and played it at a very low note. And then I did something like verify to be able to slow the pitch down, so it has this dropping effect, hence the name bass drop. So let me go ahead and just bring this all the way to 0, so that way you can hear what this sounds like. So it's just a sub, just taking a dive, and again, that's at the root note of what we're using. So if you don't have bass drops, there are, I believe, free samples that you can find out there, whether it's on YouTube or other online sources to do it. If you don't have one, that's okay. You can replace this with other more cinematic hits, such as like gunshots or like Brahms, like things that you'll hear like in Inception and stuff. Just something to give a little bit more impact. If you don't have one at all, good thing, I provided one for you, so you have that there. It's only an F. But it's also not necessary too. For me, I liked it because I thought it did the most justice for the song at that time. So, all right, that covers our samples. Now that we're finally finished with covering all of our sound sources, the samples, I want to go ahead and jump into mixing. So let's go ahead and do that next. Okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and get started with drums here. I just want to let you know the changes I made here. All I did was make my MIDI tracks inactive, and just to save CPU utilization that I have on my computer here, just to make sure we don't have any problems while we're recording. Aside from that, they are exactly the same. We just printed those raw tracks out here. So we have our kick, snare, toms, cymbals. I do have some auxes that are going on, so that way we're going to have a room later. We're going to be using a sum for all these different elements of the drum together come together. We have our DI bass and our DI guitars, and then those other elements that I talked about earlier. So let's go ahead and look at the kick. Let's take a section of the song that we want to just kind of repeat over and over. I'm going to take this intro portion. The intro portion, if you don't know, already kind of sounds like this. I'll go ahead and turn these on as well. In fact, let's just go ahead and make it easy. So obviously that's not mixed. I got a lot of things disabled, but that way you know what section of the song we're looking at immediately coming into the intro, going to that first verse there. So looking at the kick, let's solo it. Let's hear just what this sounds like. Now remember, I highly suggest at this point, because things are going to start quiet and get louder, turn up your headphones and then turn them down accordingly, or turn them down accordingly. But the first thing we did for our kick is we went ahead and we used an EQ. This is going to be the FabFilter Pro Q3. If you don't have it, you can just kind of copy what I'm doing on each one of these bands. So first thing we're doing is we're getting rid of everything below 30 Hertz. Reason for that is because we don't want to keep any frequencies that we're not really hearing that we think is going to make the mix muddy or more difficult to hear the other elements. So for that reason, I removed everything below 30. It looks like we're doing minus 1.8 dB at 102. We have minus 2.86 dB at 175, and then minus 1.63 dB at 2015, all right? Now, another thing I will also mention, if I'm going fast in this video, I just want to make sure I'm going at a speed that makes this video not too long, doesn't take forever. So if you need to slow this down, you can either slow down the video using the tools and features with YouTube's playback, or you can always pause the video to watch these different settings that I'm applying as well. So that's going to be for the first EQ. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what that sounds like. First without. And with. So just removing a little bit of the low end, getting a little bit of the clickiness out, at least here in the 2K region. And again, we're removing that everything below 30. Let's look at our next plugin here. This is going to be here, the Slate Virtual Mix Rack, really great suite. We are using a console emulation. This is going to be the Brit 4K. We then have two SSL EQs and then a distressor. So, yep, the console emulation is going to be on the Brit 4K. The SSL strip, let's see, first band, we're doing plus 2.3 dB. That's going to be at 12,700K. Let's see, we have 2.63 dB, and that's going to be at 6,270K, and that's going to be with a Q of 0.9. And then we also have negative 10, or excuse me, not negative 10, negative 2.1 dB, and that's going to be at 812. And that's going to be a Q of 0.96. We're not doing anything with these bottom bands here. Next EQ, it looks like we're doing negative 50 dB. We're cutting a ton out here. And this is going to be at 200 Hertz. And then we have a Q of 1.69. Last two bands, we're not doing anything. And then we have our distressor emulator over here. This is going to be the compressor. And let's see, input is at 5.2, attacks at 4.4, release is going to be at 0, outputs at 6.5, the ratio is going to be 4, and then the mix is at 100%. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like without and then with. So as you can hear, it's definitely has a little bit more clickiness to it, has a little bit more life. That compressor is definitely working to kind of crush it a bit. Really like the sound of it. All right, next here, we have another EQ as well. Looks like we're kind of taming some of what we did a bit. We want to be able to keep that energy, but make sure it's not too distracting from the rest of the mix. So we've done another high pass filter. 20 Hertz below is not going to be passing. Let's see here. We have minus 4.87 dB at 100 Hertz. We then have negative 2 at 244. Let's see, what's this next band? They're also close together. Negative 3.59 at 290. And let's see, negative 2.3 at 413. We have another one, which is going to be negative 2 at 545. And then our last three bands here, we have negative 4.73 at 2,533, negative 3 at, negative 3.8 at 3,572, and then negative 1.47, that's going to be at 4,711. So again, with, without. All right, first without. All right, and that makes up our kick. So let's go ahead and take a listen to our snare now. All right, so for our snare, this is going to, let's see, first we're using the virtual mix rack. We have the console emulation on USA. These first two bands for the SSL strip we're not using. However, we're just using this one band, this green band, and it looks like we're doing plus 2.1 decibels at 261, so a little bit more body is what we're giving it. It looks like the Q's at 1.5, and then we have our 1176 compressor that we're using, an input of negative 28 point, what was it, 4? Yep. And then we have an output of negative 15.6. The attack is set to 1. The release is set to 7. And then we have the circuit set to 1. The ratio is at 4. And the mix is at 100%. So let's listen without and with. Sounds really good. I like it a lot. It sounds like it's taking some of the ambience of the room from those snare sounds and just making it more audible. That way you can hear it. So it gives it a little bit more, more of an impact, more energy. All right, next, let's take a look here. This is going to be the EQ. Now, this looks quite aggressive, but let me go ahead and explain. So we have our high pass filter, which is going to be cutting everything below 100. The reason for that is because when I mix, I kind of learned with a mentality that, especially with metal, where there's a lot of elements going on at once, if there's something that you can't really hear, remove it, because when it comes to mixing, it'll make it so that way it's not as muddy. So for me, I genuinely thought that I was probably going to do something around 60 or 80, but as I listened with the rest of the mix and brought it up, it was right at 100. I felt that it was appropriate. Now, if you want to change this, you're more than welcome to. You can lower this down 60, 80, whatever you feel is best. But at least for what I did, this is where we're at. So let's take a look at the other bands, though, where I'm go ahead and cutting some stuff out. So we have minus 1.5 decibels. That's at 635. Minus 1.39 decibels at 821. And then minus 1.63, and that's at 975. And then lastly, we have minus 1.8, and that's at 4,801. So let's listen to this. And with. All right, excellent. Now, lastly, multi-band compressor. Multi-band compressors, especially this one, the Pro multi-band compressor by FabFilter. Excellent multi-band compressor. I like it a lot. I use it a lot on drums. So yeah. What I'm going to do is, because there's 5 different bands, I'm going to kind of speed run through this. And I'm going to also save a little bit of time here. As you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different controls. I'm only changing 3 of them. So the range is always going to be -6. The output is always going to be at 0. So we're just going to focus on these 3 parameters for all of these bands. So let's get it started. Starting on the lowest band, it's going to be a threshold of negative 29.95, an attack of 40%, and the release at a 6.4%. Next band, threshold is going to be negative 21.44, attack is 37.6, release is at 8.1. Middle band, we're going to do negative 20.71, attack is going to be at 40.5, release at 15.5. Fourth band is going to be negative 19.77. The attack is going to be at 50%. And then let's see, the release is going to be 9.8. And the last band here, this is going to be negative 27.89. Let's see, the attack is going to be 20 and the release is going to be at 20. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. So as you can see, what this multi-band compressor is doing, it's really catching, especially on the highs, however it's set right now. So that way it does have an attack. It can punch through against the rest of the other tracks, but making sure that it's not too distracting as well. So especially with snares, I feel like you have to have this balance between it being aggressive and in your face, but also making sure that it's not taking away from all the other elements of the song. So, and that takes care of both our kick and snare. Let's go ahead and take a look at the toms. Okay, so to start off our toms, let's go ahead and pull up the first plugin, which I believe is going to be the virtual mix rack. Excellent. And another thing I want to do is, because toms are only played in certain sections of the song, I'm going to go ahead and take this clip right here. Let's bypass this. I want to hear what this sounds like by itself really quickly. Let's just remind ourselves. really roomy, great sounding toms. Let's see what we've done. So we have the virtual mix rack. We have the console emulation set to USA. Let's see. We have just these two bands here that we are working with. We have 2.76 dB gain, which is going to be at 4,350 with a Q of 1.5. We have negative 2.76 at about 600, and that's going to be at a 1.5 Q as well. And let's take a look at this compressor again. So the input's going to be at 30.3, output is at 15.4, attack is going to be at 1, circuit is at also on 1, the release is going to be set to 7, ratios 4, mix 100%. So let's take a listen without and with. So it sounds like we're getting a little bit more attack or snappiness on the toms, and also with that compressor, we're getting a little bit more ambience of the room sound that was already in the samples to begin with, so it makes it a little bit more lively. Let's look at our next plugin, which is going to be the EQ. So everything below 40 is what we're getting rid of. We have negative 1.5 at 635. We have negative 1.39 at 821. We have negative 1.63 at 975. And on the last band, we have negative 1.8, and that's going to be at 4,800. All right, and let's take a listen. So we're removing a bit of those mids, just I guess to make the lows and the highs a little bit more prominent. And we are taking out at 4.81, so I think that's just because maybe there was too much snap at that area. But as you can hear, it sounds good. Let's go ahead and look at our multi-band compressor that we used here. So I'm going to run through these again. So for the lower band, we have negative 29.5, attack of 40%, release is going to be 6.14%. Second band is going to be negative 21.44 on the threshold, attack is 37.6, release is at 8.1%. Third band is going to be negative 20.71 on the threshold, attack is at 40.5%, release is at 15.5%. And let's see here, fourth band is going to be negative 19.7 for the threshold, attack is at 50.3, release is at 9.8. And the last band is going to be negative 27.89, attack is going to be at 20, and the release is going to be at 20. All right, let's hear it. So quite a bit of compression that we're doing on that area. But again, we want to make sure that in those sections with the other elements of the song that are playing, it's not going to take away from it. Obviously, they want to have their presence so that way we can hear them. But again, we want to make sure they're not distracting. All right, next is going to be our cymbals. So for cymbals, let's go back to this section here. It's going to be our EQ. So no surprise, again, we're using a high pass filter. We're going to get rid of everything below 250 hertz. Now, with these other bands that you see here, except for these two here, these four bands right here, these are what I don't know, there's a better name for them, but they're problematic frequencies. There's something in the harmonics where those specific frequencies ring out and they're very harsh and sounding to the ear. So what we've done is went ahead and removed those frequencies, not remove them, but we've lowered the gain on those specific frequencies so that way they don't resonate louder than the rest of the other harmonics or sounds of the cymbal. So let's look at those first four and we'll look at the last two. So this is going to be at 4,004. We're going to do negative 4.9. We then have negative 4.65 at 3,037. We then have negative 7.98 at 4,241, negative 7.51 at 7,101. And then these last two dips is going to be negative 1.63 at, 9,545. And then negative 1.39 at 14,252. So, and a quick side note, like you guys saw, I'm taking away almost 8 dB here. When it comes to these problematic frequencies, don't be afraid to do that. You do want to make sure that you're not losing the integrity of the sound source that you're using. But if it's really going to be distracting, like you hear your guitars and you hear like there's this humming or pinching sound of a frequency that's sticking out, I generally like to try to remove it as much as I can because, I feel like, one, it can be fatiguing when you're trying to listen to a song and you have this nuisance of a sound that's going on, and it can be distracting. So, all right. Next, what we got? Virtual mix rack. No surprise here. Okay, so we have the console set to USA. We have negative 3.2, and that's at 16K. Negative 2.10, and that's going to be at 7K with a Q of 1.5. It looks like we actually did a boost, which I'm surprised I did that for Cymbals. I'm usually trying to cut them. But this is at 1.58, and this is at 2,500 hertz, and that's at 1.5K. Nothing we're doing with these lower bands. And let's take a look here. The input on this into the compressor is being negative 19.2. Output is negative 25.7. The attack is at 1. The release is at 7. The circuit is at 1. I almost said circus. And the mix is going to be at 100% with a ratio of 4. Let's take a listen to it. All right, okay. Next, let's move on to, I believe I have 2 multi-band compressors that I'm using from 2 different companies. Yep, I am. So we have, I'm going to just run these both together at the same time so that way you guys can see what I'm doing, since it's technically the same concept that we're running. So if you ask me why did I do this, why am I using 2 rather than just 1? Probably because I tried to do it on C4 first to make it work, and it did something, but it didn't fix the whole thing, so I just put another one after it. Really, it's not a good answer, but it's what I did. So starting with C4, since this is the first in line, let's look at these bands here. So we have a band at 248, another one that is, and the bands are going to be these lines here on this. So 248, 1,465, and 8,057. I'm going to go across from left to right because this just explains what the settings are for each one of these other bands. So let's see, threshold's at negative 27, negative 29.8, negative 26.2, and then negative 30. Gain is 0 across the board, and the range is negative 8 across the board. For attack, we have 33.99, 16.03, 4.99, and 2. Let's see, release is going to be 40.27, 25, 9.98, and then 5. The release is set to arc, behavior is electro, and the knee is 0.5. I'm not sure if that's the default or not, but that way you know what the settings are here. Let's go ahead and look at our multi-band compressor again. So threshold on the lower band, starting with the lower band, I should say, negative 29.5, attack is at 40%, release is at 6.4. Second band, negative 21.44, attack is 37.6, release is at 8.1. Third band is going to be negative 20.7, attack is 40.5, and release is 15.5. Let's see, fourth band is going to be negative 19.7, attack is 50.3, release 0.98, and let's see here. The last band is going to be negative 38.18, 20, and 20 for the attack and release. I believe a lot of these settings, with the exception for the threshold, like the attacks, I should say, and release, for all these multi-band compressors, I think they're almost all the same. I probably just copy them over and adjust them accordingly, not really needing to change the release, but really it was that threshold I needed to change. So just keep that in mind. If those settings do look familiar, that's probably the reason why. Okay. So let's take a quick moment to listen what all of these 4 tracks sound like together. I think we've earned it. So here we go. Yeah, I think it sounds good. Let's go ahead and turn everything off really quickly to see what it sounded like before. Again, it sounds really good, but I think what we've done here makes it sound like it's all coming from the same kit. It sounds good to me. I really like it. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next part, which is going to be the drum room and then the drum sum. So let's move on. So to get started here, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to leave here the timeline and we're going to go over to the mix window to get started on our drum room. The reason why is that we're going to send certain elements of the drum to an aux and then apply a reverb to it. So what we did here is we have this aux here. It's going to load up here any second. There we go. And I have one each for the snare, the toms, and the cymbals. And I have it also set to pre-fader as well. So just keep that in mind. What we're doing is essentially mixing the amount of each one of these elements that we want into this sum before we apply a reverb to it. So what I've done here for the snares aux, I've dropped the volume down to -3. For the toms, I've actually increased it to 2. And for the cymbals, I have it set to 0. So we should be able to hear what that sounds like now. Let's take a listen. Better yet, let me go ahead and do this section right here where we have a little bit of cymbals and snares as well. Perfect. So we can hear all of those elements, how they work together, what they sound like going to the aux. Now, if you notice, I didn't include the kick, and the reason why is me personally, I haven't really found a way, or I don't often find it to be pleasing to add the kick into the room. For me, it sounds like it's a bit too muddy. If I do add it, it's usually very little, just to get a little bit of the blossoming sound of a kick. So at least for me right now, with my current mixing skills, I opted not to do it for this song. So we just use these 3 elements. But now that we have that sound, let's go ahead and do the fun part, which is adding a reverb to it. So I have the live chamber 3 preset here on the Waves plugin, which is called IR Live. I like it. Sounds good. You can also import other impulse responses. Obviously, this is made, generally speaking, for reverbs, but you can also use this for cabinet impulse responses as well. Obviously, in this sense, we're using it for the drum room. We have the reverb time set to 1. The mix is 100%. The output is set to 0. We're not doing any dampening of any kind on any of these bands here. And again, this is the live chamber 3 preset. So let's take a listen to that. Let's also, I'm going to turn it up really quickly so that way you can hear what that sounds like. So I'm going to put it at 0. I'll bring it back down in a second. And let's do this section here. Great, sounds really good. All right, and then next we're going to go ahead and bring up the Slate virtual mix rack. All we're doing is providing a little bit of console emulation. This is gonna be the USA, so let's take a listen to that as well. Excellent, sounds good. All right. So now we're at the fun stage where we get to hear what this actually sounds like with everything else. I'm going to mute all these other elements really quickly. These other instruments in the song. And then we'll just go ahead and unmute them as we go through the rest of the mix breakdown here. So let's hear what this sounds like with the kick, snare, tom, cymbal, and the rooms all together being fed into this drum aux, which has currently everything disabled right now. So as you can probably hear what I was doing, I went ahead and muted the drum room in and out while during playbacks. That way you could hear what that sounded like, adding that drum room in there. Drum rooms, some people like to use them, some people don't. In this song, I feel it's very epic. I like to use it for it. So it worked out well, I think, for this song. And next, let's go ahead and we're going to do some processing on the drum sum altogether, the drum aux, also what it's also known as. So we went and did another console emulation, but this is not going to be by Slate Digital now. This is actually going to be by Waves Audio. So this is their NLS channel. This is a really cool plugin. I like it a lot. So they've taken 3 really famous different types of consoles and they captured the sound of it, and they've also not just of the console itself, but each individual channel for each one of the consoles. So as you can see, there's Spike, Mic, and Nevo. So for each one of these, you can see in the presets, you have all 32 channels for each one. For this track, I went ahead and did the Mic 1. It sounded good on its own. So let's take a listen to it. Let's just do this whole section. And without, with, and if you have this plugin, obviously you can play around with it. You want to change it to either a different channel on the same console, or if you want to change the console altogether to something else, you can do that as well. All right, so let's see here. Next in line is going to be the SSL bus compressor. This is probably one of the most popular bus compressors that most people use when it comes to mixing, especially within a DAW. What we're doing here, let's run through the settings really quickly. This is going to be 8.5 on the threshold. The makeup's going to be at 0. Release is going to be at 0.1, and the attack is going to be at 3 milliseconds, and the ratio is going to be at 4.1. All the other settings, we're not messing with it. I believe, if I'm correct, I'll play it back here, but this should just be really taming the snare when it's hitting loud, just making it sound like evenly, consistently the same volume. So let's hear it. Yep, and that's just providing a little compression. As you can see, the needle was really moving when the snare is slamming down. So that's the purpose for that. All right, so congratulations. We now finished the drums. We're next going to go ahead and move on to the bass. So let's do it. All right, excellent. So we finally moved on to the bass. I picked another section of the song. This is actually a breakdown. Again, we just have the DI. We're going to add the amps in later. Let's just take a listen and remind ourselves of what this sounds like. All right, and I turned up the volume there a little bit, just that way we can hear it a little bit clearer. I'm gonna go ahead and bring it back down. Oh, also, by the way, this is a good time to say this now, and I apologize I didn't do it earlier. Here on the left-hand side is going to be what the volumes are for the track. So let's run through that really quickly. For kick, it's -3.3. For snare, it's -3.8. Toms is going to be -5. Cymbals is -2. The drum aux and also the room are going to be at 0. Bass is going to be at -9. And you know what? Since we're doing this right now, let's go ahead and run through the other tracks. The rhythm guitar is going to be -7.7. The intro guitar is -13.5. Clean guitar is -14. Violins -23. Cello -23. Choirs at -3. And drone is a -19. And lastly, the bass drop is at -5.6. I'll try to run through those again as we go through each one. I tend to forget that, so again, apologize. But if you ever need to know, just look here on the video on the left-hand side of this column, and you'll see what the volume is, and that is pertaining to what the faders are set to over here. So now we know what that is. Let's go ahead and focus our attention back on the bass, starting with the virtual mix rack. So on the virtual mix rack, we are using another emulation again for the console, being USA, and we have 3 elements, 3 different bands that we're affecting here. So we have plus 6.3 dB, and that's going to be at nearly 6K, and that's going to be with a Q of 1.11. We also then have negative 2.89, and that's going to be at 323 hertz, and that's going to be a Q of 1.5. And then we also do have a cutoff that's happening at 38.7. And let's take a look here. We then have our compressor, 1176 again. We're doing an input of -31.2. We have -15.4 on the output. Attack at 2.47. Release is at 6.26. Circuit's actually on number 2 this time. The ratio is going to be at 4, and the mix is going to be at 100%. So let's take a listen to that. All right, and hold on one second. It looks like the compressor might have been off. Let me go ahead and take a listen now. All right, so the compressor's there. To be honest, I don't think we need it. I'm going to go ahead and remove it just because I know that we have, let's see, some other things that we're doing here later down the line. Yeah, we have a compressor anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. So disregard that there. My apologies on that. So next is going to be the Parallax amp sim by Neural DSP. This is an awesome amp sim for bass. I haven't really found anything like it. It's really good. Great sound. What I've done here, it looks like we have an input of 0. The gate is at -80. This is set to mono. That's fine since it's just a mono track. We don't have any effects or anything that's going on. The oversampling is set to normal. I can change that to high actually really quickly. There we go. Let me save my session as well. The preset that we're using is actually the All Our Bass Has Abandoned Us. I think this is a play on the Archetype song. Very good band, by the way. Let's hear what it sounds like now. And this also has -6.8 on the output. Let's listen. Let me actually turn this up. I'm going to just set this to 0, and then I'll turn it back down again once we're ready to move on. So sounds really, really good. And actually, let's also, I like the breakdown, but I want something with a little bit more variance. Let's go back to this section here that we were working on earlier, the verse coming in from the intro. Awesome. And it looks like I had the EQ on as well. So let's try that one more time. Yeah, sounds great. Really like it. So we already were listening to it earlier. I apologize about that, but just to go over it now, this is going to be the EQ that we're doing after the amp sim. We're getting rid of everything below 50. We have a drop of negative 1.96 at 116. We have negative 1.22 at 147, negative 1.39 at 190, and then negative 2.78 at 224. And the last two bands is going to be negative 2 at 813 and negative 2 at 2053. Man, all these numbers, I'm getting tongue twisted here. All right. And you already heard what I listened to when I had it earlier, so I'll skip that part. I'll save you some time. Let's go ahead and look at the compressor that we're using. Now, this is the API 2500 compressor. I like this a lot for bass. It just has a different sound. It's interesting. I like it a lot. Controlling bass can sometimes be problematic. I'll either use this or I will use a multi-band compressor. Sometimes I've done both. I think because this gives you a bit of a more play with setting the tone, like this tone section here. It's kind of fun to work around with. So let's look here. Threshold's at 8.5. Attack is at 1. Ratio is at 4.1. Release is at 0.05. The knee is going to be set to soft, the thrust is a medium, and also the tone is going to be set to old. Link I didn't mess around with, and I didn't mess around with any of these other knobs. So let's take a listen without and with. Yeah, I like this compressor. I feel like it gives it more energy. I like it a lot. Okay, excellent. So now we finally finished with the bass. We're going to finally move on to the guitars. Section's going to be a little bit longer since we have 3 different guitars, but let's go ahead and do it. All right, so before we actually get started with guitars, I apologize. What I want to do is take a listen what the bass and drums sound like together. So let's take an opportunity to do that really quickly. I'm going to mute this guitar tone. We're coming to it, I promise, but let's hear it. Oh, and we also need to lower the volume as well. There we go, back to -9. Let's listen to that again. All right, excellent, great. Now, you might have wondered why I soloed the kick and bass together at a certain point when I was doing playback. The reason why is because, generally speaking, what I like to do when I'm mixing bass, I like to try to balance the kick and the bass to be at the same volume. So that way I'm not trying to necessarily set it to the same volume as the rest of the drums, because the cymbals can get loud, the snares can get loud, the toms can get loud. And if you're trying to do it with the guitar, it can work too. But as a fundamental rule of thumb that I like to use, since I think they're both very bass heavy instruments or elements, I should say, the kick and the bass, I tried to set them to the same volume. So if I play this back, you should be able to hear they're relatively close to the same volume. Especially with metal, where the rhythm of that bass and the kick, where those notes line up, it definitely sounds like it has a lot of impact there. So excellent. Now that we've done that, now let's go to what I promised, which is going to be the guitar tone. So let's take a listen to what our DI sounds like. Excellent. Okay. And let's jump into the first plugin, which is going to be our amp sim here. This is going to be the Neural DSP Nolly, Archetype Nolly. Again, they make good stuff. What else can I say? I'm just repeating myself at this point. So let's take a look. We have the default setting on. We have the set to stereo. It's important, especially, remember, we're working with a stereo pair of guitars. Make sure it's set to stereo so it's not in mono. Oversampling set to high, inputs at 0, gates at 80. This is the default preset. Doesn't look like we have any pedals on here going into the amp, so let's move on to that. The amp here, all of the knobs are set to noon, so good on that. Don't have to change anything, makes it easy for you guys. Let's see, EQ, nothing going on here. The speaker itself looks like it is using an SM57. Position is 0.35, distance is, or excuse me, distance is at 0.1, and the level is at -12. Let me make this a little bit bigger, so that way it's easier for you guys to see as well. Oh dear God, that's taking up the whole screen. Well, that's all right. It'll work. We'll make it work. Okay, and then lastly, on the pedals, nothing, because it's a rhythm. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like now. You know, like when you walk into a kitchen and you get this really good smelling, like, I don't know, like the scent of garlic, and it just makes you happy. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting with a really good guitar tone. So anyways, that's that. Let's go ahead and move on to the rest of the other plugins that we're using in the chain. Whoop, accidentally hit the space bar there. All right, so this is going to be the Q-Clone EQ. Now, as you can see, there's no parameters to change here, no bands to mess around with. The reason why is because Q-Clone is a different plugin in the sense where you actually pair it with an external EQ. So let's say if I had like a vintage EQ, say like an API, and I only had one of them, but I want to be able to use that API on multiple different tracks. What this does, it allows you to set the tone on the EQ first. You then run a signal through it to then capture what those changes are, and it makes a snapshot of those settings for you to be able to then reuse your external EQ on a different track. So, as you can see, this is coming from an API TCS full strip min, which is kind of an obscure name, but essentially this was from a preset pack of a for Q-Clone. And again, this is modeling an API strip. I like this a lot. It sounds really good. Now, I will say, if you have the Pro Tools session, you should be able to open this up and it'll just have the setting here. You're good. You're fine. You shouldn't need anything else to have to do with it. If you don't have the Pro Tools session, what I would say to do instead is you have two options. You can either not use this, which I don't think will really be that detrimental not to have some sort of console emulation on it. It'll just sound slightly different, but you're still going to get a great sound. So if you do have a console emulation, you can use something like the NLS, which we discussed about earlier from Waves, or you can use the Slate Digital mix rack. So you have those options. But let's hear what this particular plugin is doing. So first without. So giving a little bit more warmth, I'm going to turn it up to 0, set the fader at 0. Let's listen again. It's going to be louder, so just monitor your headphones. So you can probably hear it has a little bit more warmth there once we did that. All right, next is going to be, let's see, the EQ again. We're rolling everything off below 80. We have a dip at -2.34 at 173.45. We have another dip of 1.71 decibels at 194.49, minus 2.2 at 258.96, and then -1.47 at 450 hertz. And let's hear that. All right, and as you can hear there, we're really cutting out a lot of those mids. More of the lows to low mid section. Again, with all the other elements that are going on in the song, we want to make sure that it's a tight sound and that it's not disruptive. If you want to add more mids back, obviously just go ahead and pull this back. This kind of works similar to like recipes in the kitchen. If something's too spicy or has too much garlic, go ahead and pull those back or add more if you do like those things. Same thing applies when it comes to mixing. So let's hear now, just to prove my point, let's hear what this sounds like with all the other elements, but without these last two plugins initiated. Let's hear it. Let's also reduce the volume back down to where it was appropriately. So as you can hear, the guitar is cutting through. You can still hear the notes of what they're playing very clearly. It sounds good. All right, next, I'm gonna bring the volume down to 0 again, or up to 0 again, I should say. we have our multi-band compressor. Let's run through the bands again. So starting with the threshold, negative 29.5, attack is going to be at 40.4, releases at 6.4. Second band is going to be negative 21.44, attack is at 37.6, release is going to be 8.1%. Third is going to be a negative 20.71 with an attack of 40.5, releases at 15.5. Fourth band, man, I'm running through this here. Negative 19.77, attack is 50.3%, releases at 9.8. And the last band is going to be negative 38.26, attack is at 20%, and the release is at 20%. All right. Before we move further, like I said, I know I'm running through this quickly here. Make sure to either slow down the video to be able to capture what those settings are, or again, pause the video at any time. I just want to make sure that this video is not going to go too long. So let's go ahead and take a listen now. We're set to 0. Yep. Let me solo. Forgot to do that. Great. And that's just allowing it so that way certain notes aren't popping out or seeming louder at certain times. That's what we have there. So lastly, what's in our signal chain? This is going to be the SSL, a bus compressor again. Threshold here, let's start with that, is at 0.2. Makeup is at 5.3. Attack is going to be at 10 milliseconds. The release is going to be at 0.3. And the ratio is going to be at 4.4. All other settings are off. Let's hear what it sounds like. Great sounding compressor. I feel like when it's turned on, it's really controlling the dynamics of the rest of the other notes, but at the same time, it's giving it a bit more energy from it as well. So awesome. That's the rhythm guitars. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next two guitars, the intro and the clean. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at that intro guitar really quickly. We'll just highlight the section. We'll make a clip out of it. So amp sim, what are we using here? All right, this looks like it's the Neural DSP Gojira that we're using here. So let's start from left to right again on what effects that we're using. This is going to be no effects are on here, so nothing going in. Let's see. By the way, input is going to be at 0. Gate is at negative 60. Mono is fine for this, opposed to the rhythm where we had two guitars that were playing in each, or one guitar playing in each channel, left and right. There were slightly different performances. With the intro, it's going to be an exact copy, so mono is fine. You don't have to worry about that. Let's see. All of our other pedals, it looks like the dirt is on this pedal. It's supposed to be distortion. So distortion here, not noon, probably I would say between 10 and 11. We then also have, wouldn't be 3, so probably 4 o'clock on the filter, and the volume I would say is set to 1. And this is also the default preset, so you should be able to put this on and it should just come up, but just in case, I am running through the different settings here. Okay, so for the amp, let's see, 9 o'clock on the gain, noon on low, mid is at about 1, high is also about 1, master 1. Let's see, present, it's actually turned all the way down. Depth is at noon, and the level, I would say, is about around 10, 11. Okay, and then let's take a look here, our speaker section. Yep, okay, so we have an SM57 on the left and an AK414 on the right-hand side. Let's run through the 57 first, so that's going to be 0.3 on the position, distance is 0, negative 12 on the level, pan is at 0, and obviously it's set to active. We want to have these. Both of these are going to be set to active. Polarity, though, the polarities are left alone. Don't mess with the polarities. Okay, so now for the 414, we have 0.355 on the position, distance is 0, negative 24.6 on the level, pan is also set to 0. Excellent. And lastly, it looks like on the output, I put it to negative 1.5. Sometimes I will make those adjustments, so just keep that in mind. And then it looks like for our, outside of the speaker to add different effects, whether we want reverbs or delays and stuff, it doesn't look like I have that on here. So let's hear what this sounds like on its own. I know I'm going to sound like a huge fanboy when it comes to this, but I just really like what Neural DSP does. It's good stuff. There are other amp sims, I promise, that I actually like, but I think at this point when I was mixing this, I was a true unashamed fanboy of their stuff. Okay, Next in line, what do we have? So this is going to be an EQ that we're using. Now you might be wondering, what the heck is this going on? Remember, this is an intro guitar. So for an intro guitar, there's kind of two ways to go about it. You can either use like a modified version of an amp setting where that like you just pull back the gain so it doesn't have as much distortion. Or what you can do is keep the setting that you have, but then add a telephone effect. Telephone effects are really common. You probably know what they are, but that's what we're doing here for this intro guitar. So let's hear what it sounds like, and then I will actually go over the settings that we're using. So here's without. And with. All right, excellent. So let's talk about how we get this sound. If you happen to be using Pro Tools, it's very easy for you. All you have to do is go to the presets here, go to vocals, and look, telephone vocal 7. There it is. You click that and you get this. This pulls up. For those of you who don't are using different EQs, let's talk about this. You have a high band and a low band filter. What we're doing on the high band filter is we're actually bringing it all the way up to about 251, and on the low band we're doing about 4,590 on, again, that's the low band filter. And then we're actually increasing some mids here. It looks at like 1,580 hertz with a Q of about 1. And again, that's about 6 dB of gain in that section. But by doing this, by cutting the highs and the lows and increasing that mids, that's what's giving you the telephone effect sound. Now, I mentioned before about using presets. Presets are great. However, particularly with intro guitars, you have high tuned, low tuned guitars. So you may want to adjust all three of these settings. You might want to go ahead and actually have more of that low end, or kind of take away some low end that is there that you may not want. So just adjust accordingly, but at least you see what I'm doing here for this particular song. All right, next in line, we have our virtual mix rack again. So for the virtual mix rack, we are using another console emulation. This is going to be the Brit 4KE. And then we have our distressor. Distressor, let's see. Let's run through this. Input is at 5. Attack is at 5. Release is at 1.9. And let's see, output is going to be 6.5. The ratio is at 6.1. So I think we're really crushing this guitar to really get some energy. This is the first thing that you're hearing aside from the drone that's coming from the band. So let's hear what this sounds like now. I'm not going to even bypass it. Let's just hear it. Yeah, that compressor is really crushing down on it, but it adds some aggression to it. It sounds really good. All right. And then lastly, what do we got here? This is going to be our reverb. This is the Abbey Roads plate by Waves. Now, I understand that not everyone is going to have Waves plugins, or even this particular one in general. This was the one I just happened to use that sounded really good. However, you can use other reverbs, and I'll show you in a second what you can do if you don't have this one. It won't be a complete replica. And again, when it comes to mixing, it's like different things inside your kitchen. You have different ingredients. Okay, you don't have maybe the same type of garlic that you bought from the same store as someone else did, but that's fine. You can get something close. Same thing here. Okay, so let's hear what this sounds like. So without and with. And as you can hear it tailing off at the end as well. The guitar is really kind of bouncing around in the play. It sounds really, really good. So I'll run through these settings in case you do happen to have this. So to be honest, I don't think I messed with any of this stuff because it looks so confusing. It just sounded good on its own. I think I just messed with the mix level. So we have, looks like the input set to 0. The plate selector is A. Crosstalk is set to 0. This damper is at 2. Treble 0. The bass cut is at 0. Pre-delay 0. Drive 0, analog is off, and the mix is set to, what is that, 9, and the output is set to 0, okay? So, give me a second, I'm gonna go ahead and bring up another reverb. Okay, great. So I went ahead and actually disabled the Abbey Roads plate reverb, and I brought up what is the default reverb that you get inside of Pro Tools. So as we know, we're using a plate in the Abbey Road. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and select a plate. Let's go ahead and do a large plate. That's fine too. You can select whether you want a small, medium, large. We'll keep it to the default. Default was at 0. I don't think we need to mess with anything else here. All we need to make sure is sometimes the gain is turned down on this. Have it at 0. And on the mix, it was at 9% of the other one. Let's hear what that would sound like if we did it here. And let's play it. All right, and you can hear it tailing off at the end. Now, I think the tail on the other one was a little bit longer, so let's go ahead and extend this. I'm gonna like almost double it here. Let's hear without. And with. All right, so you can add more into the mix if you want to. You can extend the decay if you want to, adjust your pre-delay, however you want to adjust this to get a similar effect. But the point is that you don't necessarily need all of the same plugins that I'm using as well. So just keep that in mind. I'll go ahead, I'll remove this. We're gonna go ahead and turn our other reverb back on. Now that we're done with the intro guitar, let's move on to the clean guitar. All right, for the clean guitar, let's find a section where it's playing. Let's pick the chorus here. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a clip out of this. Let me press play. This is just going to be the DI for a moment. All right, and also let me reduce the volume back down on our intro guitar. All right, let me make another clip out of this again. There we go. Bring this to 0. I really like that. I think it sounds really pretty. Okay. Let's go ahead and start with our first plugin. This is actually going to be the Kramer Pi compressor. This is just trying to control some of the dynamics of what's being played before it actually goes into the amp. For me, I tend to struggle when it comes to making clean tones. I always feel like the dynamics of it are always changing so much. So I try to remedy the situation by adding the compressor at the front, so that way it would be a more even sound going into the amp. So with that being said, we have -2 on the threshold, the decay is at 8, compression's at 3.1, and the output is at 6. So let's hear it. So yeah, we definitely got some compression going on over there. So as I mentioned, this is now going into the amp sim. This is going to be the Nolly amp sim again by Neural DSP. Looks like the pedals are off. Yep. So now this is going to be the amp that we're using. Let's take a look. The setting here on bright is enabled. The gain is about noon. Looks like the bass is about, what is that? Maybe 10 o'clock. Mid is almost 9, somewhere between 9 and 10. The treble is about 1. Master is at 100%. And the level is also, I would say, about 1 as well. Let's see. Gate is at -18. Input is at 0. Oversampling. Oh, no, it was on high. Great. Perfect. And this is also, again, another preset. This is the pristine clean. But in case I turned anything off, just make sure to adjust these settings as I'm showing you here. All right, our EQ, we do have some changes that are going on. We have a dip of -4.5 at 65 hertz, -6.3 at 16K. And then let's move on to the speaker here. Okay, so it looks like the left side is turned off. The right side is on. However, it says no custom IR. So I'm not sure if that means we're not using an IR or not. If you see the setting, just have it here. So it might just be, this is the sound that's coming directly from the amp. But we'll run through the levels anyways. So it's -12, pan is 0, nothing on the polarity. And obviously this is on here. And I've actually turned off the delay and reverb because I'm adding my own after this. So let's hear what this sounds like now with the amp. It sounds really nice. I like it. It's got a little bit of a gain or crunch to it, so it's not completely clean, but sounds really good. All right. Next in our list is going to be the it's going to be the FabFilter EQ again. I'm always trying to read them. It's like, it's the FabFilter EQ. That's what it is. You know what it is, guys. All right. So cutting off everything below 70, we have a dip of -8.4 at 175, -2.29 at 239, and then we have -2.59 at 351, and -1.47 at 529. And then those problematic frequencies that we're having with the cymbals, they happen a lot in guitars too. So it looks like I've done some cuts here. We have -8 at 1,250, -8 at 2,113, and then -8 at 3,125. We have then a dip at -3 at 3,606, -1.6 at 4,534, -1.47 at 5,647, and lastly, we went ahead and did a low pass filter. So everything above 10,385 gone. We're not using it. So let's take a quick listen to that. I'm just going to play it with what it sounds like. So controlling those frequencies, it has a lot of body, but it sounds really good on its own. So let's move on to what the next plugin is here. Okay, this is going to be another virtual mix rack. So we have our emulation of the console. It's going to be USA. We then have an API EQ. We have +2 at 10K, +2 at 800 hertz, -4 at 400 hertz, and then it's just going to be nothing on these last bands. The SSL, though, we do have -2.69, and that's going to be at 1000 hertz. With a Q of 1.5. And we didn't mess with this band. And then lastly is going to be our distressor. We have 3 on the input. Attack is at 6.1. Release is at 0. The output is going to be 6.5 with the ratio being at 4.1. And it looks like we have this DIS2 enabled and the ratios at mix. So I'm going to do this one because it looks like we're doing a lot of changes here. Bypass and then with it. So we're definitely getting some color. We got the EQ sound. I think it's sounding good. Let's move on to what the next plugin will be down the line. All right, this is going to be our TubeTech compressor that we're doing. I think this is more subtle just to kind of catch any transients that are kind of popping out. But let's look here. Gain is going to be at 1.7, ratio 6.1. The threshold is at 0.2. And it looks like we have a fixed attack and release. So let's take a listen. Yeah, so really it's just catching those little peak transients that are sticking out a bit. All right, so this should be the fun stuff where we're adding our delay and a reverb. So for delay, I'm actually using the stock Pro Tools delay. I think it sounds really good. I've gone on to use other things like from Valhalla. They make some really good stuff. But for this session, I did use this. So let's take a look at what I did here. The mix is set to 40% on each side. We have our feedback set to 30%. It looks like we're using a quarter note, a dotted quarter note, excuse me, on the left-hand side, and then just a regular quarter note on the right-hand side. We're also using a low-pass filter on both of them, and that's going to be at 3000. So let's take a listen. A lot of ambience. This is a very, wet sounding guitar, but I think it does a really good job of giving a sense of space. And then lastly, our reverb. This is probably one of my favorite reverbs to use. I know a lot of people like to use Valhalla Shimmer. To me, because it's so common and everyone use it, I like to call it the Wilhelm Scream of reverbs. If you don't know what that is, type in Wilhelm Scream and you'll instantly recognize what I'm talking about. So let's look at what I did for the settings though. The mix is set to 40%. The reverb mode is at stereo. Shift is at 12. Feedback 0, diffusion is at 0.91, size left it at 50%, low cut is at 10, high cut is at 8000, mod rate is at 0.59, the depth is at 0.3, and then the color set to bright and the pitch mode is set to single. This is going to be a very, again, ambient sounding kind of guitar, so let's hear what it sounds like with this reverb. And let's just take a moment to listen to what we had at the beginning. I just want to just bypass the delay and the reverb. So this is without those effects. So a little bit slightly crunchy guitar tone, but as soon as, and it's in your face, but as soon as we add these effects, all right, and I just turned down the volume there, but as you can hear, it kind of transforms the sound of it. It sounds really good. Okay, next is going to be our violins, our cellos, choirs, drones, and the bass drop. And then lastly, after that, we're going to go ahead and get to the actual master bus, where we'll be doing some processing too. So let's go ahead and move on to that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a quick opportunity to listen to what all of the elements that we've mixed so far together sound like before we move on to the violins, the strings, the choir, and all the other elements. So let's go ahead and listen. This is the section just before the last chorus. And just for now, I am actually going to turn up the volume on the Ozone Pro. That will just increase the volume a little bit so you can hear what it sounds like, but you'll have the general idea. All right, and we'll go ahead and stop there. I'll turn off the ozone for now. I just wanted to increase the level a little bit so you can hear what all of the elements are finally kind of all sounding together. Again, it's sounding like it's all in the same room. It sounds good. So let's look at these other elements we're going to add, starting with the violin. Actually, all these whole sections can be really easy, but for almost all of them, all we're doing here is adding delay and reverb, just giving a little bit more ambience. So let me go ahead and increase these to all 0. Whoops. 0 there. And let's start with this violin track. I'm also going to increase the size of the transients. It's not actually changing the gain. This is just for a visual standpoint to see what it looks like and where it's starting. I'll turn it back down in a little bit, but this is the violin. Oh, let's turn off the other elements. So this is just the raw violin. Okay, great. So it already has a little bit of reverb in there, but with this being the chorus and also this playing during the pre-chorus, we want it to be a little bit more spacious. We don't want it to be so direct in your face during this part. So we have a delay. This is actually the same delay settings as we were using before for the clean guitar. And these settings on the delay are going to be the same thing for the cello, the choir, and also I believe for the drone as well. Let me check the drone. No, drone's doing just shimmer. So this is just going to actually be just for the cello and the violin. It's going to be the same exact settings here. So let's hear with the delay. All right, getting a little bit of that spaciousness, sounding good. Let's add the simmer, or the shimmer. Simmer, sounds like I'm cooking. All right, so the shimmer, same exact preset as what it was for the clean as well. So I'm not going to dive into that. Let's just listen to it. Let's hear what that actually sounds like with the clean guitar. I'll bring this up to 0 as well. Sounds really good. All right, now let's do this with the cello. Again, we've already said that these are the same settings for the delay and the reverb, so. All right, so I soloed the cello there for a second. I'll play it again. It's really quiet. You probably won't be able to even hear it at the end of the final product. I just added there, just add a little bit more body, even though you're probably not going to catch it. What can I say, man? I like cellos. Okay, so that's the cello. Let's bring the volume down on these again. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and we'll leave these unmuted, but let's go ahead and look at this choir now. So let's listen to it just by itself. Oh, why am I not getting anything on this section? Is it not playing? Oh, because that's the cello. That's why. This is the choir here. Let's take a listen to this. All right, so it was at -3. I brought it up to almost about 8. So that's the raw sound. Let's see, we're adding reverb to it. And this is going to be same exact settings as it was before. Let's take a listen. All right, and I might actually turn this up in the final mix. We'll see. We'll take a look at it in a moment here. Let's go to the drone. Let's start at the beginning. We have, let's see, what's this first thing here? Okay, so the drone by itself, I want to talk about this. Sounds good. This is, remember, the reflections patch from photosynthesis. Let's hear it again. So really nice sound. However, I used what is called a lo-fi plugin here. You can change the sound, alter the sound of it by quite a bit by changing its sample rate, sample size, and the anti-alias. So let's hear what this sounds like with what I have here. So as you can probably hear, it sounds like there's almost like a low pass filter on it. And that's kind of what we're doing here, except by adjusting these settings. So we have this on linear. I don't even know how to pronounce that part. Sorry. The sample rate though is going to be 787. The bits is going to be 17, and the anti-alias is going to be 78. We're not doing anything with the distortion or the noise or saturation. It's just these three settings that we're handling here. If you don't have a lo-fi plugin though, you can use a lo-fi filter. It doesn't even, again, this is the stock one that comes with Pro Tools. If you want to, you can even use third-party lo-fi filters to be able to get kind of a similar sound. But again, we're just kind of altering it, changing it a little bit. And lastly, our shimmer. Sounds really good. Okay, excellent. So now we have actually pretty much everything except for the bass drop. So let's just go ahead and take a quick look at that. Bass drop, I have done zero processing on this. All I've done is reduced it to about 5.6 on the fader here, as you can see. So let's hear what this sounds like. Actually, I'm going to take a moment to play from all the way to the beginning to when this drops. That kind of gives us a chance to listen to most of the elements in the song and how they play along together. I'm also going to turn Ozo 8 on, so turn down your headphones if you need to for a second. But here we go. Perfect. And you can hear the bass drop. You can turn it down a little bit if you want to. Turn it up again. It's to your preference on how you want to do it. But the great news is we've actually looked at all of the instruments in this song. So congratulations. So the last thing we're going to now do is go ahead and look at the master bus, and see what we're doing here for final processing before we print this. So let's go ahead and move on to that. All right, so congratulations for making it this far. We are finally ready to look at what we're doing for the master bus. So let me go ahead and increase the size of this here. So it looks like we're using 5 different plugins. Now, again, it's going to get louder at this final stage, so just keep that in mind. I'll try to do my best to warn you, but that way you're not surprised by how loud it gets, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is turn on the virtual mix rack here, and we're using another console emulation. However, instead of the other one, which was black, it was representing for the sound that it's getting from a particular channel. This is actually the mix bus. So we have it here. I think this is the Trident emulation that it's emulating here, but it's this one with this symbol here. Then next, let's go ahead and jump over to the next stage, which is going to be an EQ. So for the EQ, we're actually cutting everything below 20. Again, we're really trying to control our mids. And then also we're getting rid of everything above 18,000K. I know this looks kind of aggressive, but again, if it's adding some harshness on the cymbals or the guitars, it's taking away from everything else. Sometimes it's okay to do this as well. Another thing I will also say, I will not pretend to be a mastering engineer. I am not a mastering engineer whatsoever. In fact, most times I'll either, whether it's not mixing on these monitors that I'm using here, I'll use my headphones. I'm just making decisions that I personally think makes the song sounds better based on the mix that I did. So please don't take my word as final. Make adjustments, changes however you see fit. Again, with the videos that I have, a lot of people ask me questions how I get this sound. So that's what I'm doing. I'm showing you guys how it is I'm getting this sound. So again, high pass, low pass filter. Now, let's talk about these 3 bands in the middle. Negative 1.06 dB at 175, negative 1.14 at 354, and then negative 1.22 at 2093. So obviously we're just trying to get a little bit of control in these different areas here. Next, this is going to be our SSL compressor. So the SSL compressor here, we have a threshold of 13.3. The attack is going to be 3 milliseconds. The release is going to be at 0.1 millisecond. Makeup's going to be at 3, and the ratio is actually going to be at 2. So what I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead and actually start bringing in these first 3 elements as we play along. This is the final section, or the final chorus that plays before it goes into the outro. So again, let's go ahead and turn these off. And as I play back, I will turn those 3 on so you can hear what each one of those things are doing. Let's do it. Excellent. So I think that's a good place to stop. So as you can hear, with the combination of those things, the mix bus is just kind of giving it a bit of energy and glue, kind of bringing those, those different elements together, especially, when you're using a mix bus like that, it's kind of working as a final sum. So you're getting that flavor, that sound that goes across all the different tracks. You then have your EQ, like I said, just controlling certain elements about it. And then lastly, you have the compressor, which is more so gluing everything together, making sure it's controlling the transients as a whole. Like, again, these separate instruments are now coming together as one. So it's controlling them as if it's a single unit here. Now, last 2 things we're going to do. Let's look at the multi-band compressor and then ozone. So with the multi-band compressor, we have our 5 bands. Let's run through them again. Band number 1 is going to be negative 10.4 with an attack of 30.3 and a release of 20. Let's see. Second band here, we have a threshold of negative 18.46, an attack of 24, release of 20. And then third band is going to be negative 16.5, attack is 28.3, release is 20. Fourth band is negative 13.84 with an attack of 29.3, releases at 20. And then lastly, our final band is negative 17.3, an attack of 20, release at 20. And that is it. We're done for the multi-band. Let's take a listen to this one. This one I'm going to actually play by itself without the ozone first. I just want you to be able to hear what this is doing. So without... Excellent. So you could probably see there where it's really activating the compressor is on the kicks, controlling the low end, and especially on the snare hits. It looks like it's grabbing the body of it, making sure that it's not, popping out so much. It's not protruding so much out from the rest of the mix. So that's going to be our multi-band. And then lastly, our final plugin to cover is Ozone 8. And I promise this is probably going to be the easiest one to cover. You know why? Because I use the Master Assistant. Yeah, that's right. I am shameless to say it. Again, I'm not shameless to say it. I am not a mastering engineer. So when I release this content and I want you guys to be able to hear it, I want to make sure that it's loud enough for you guys to be able to hear. I've made all the other adjustments later down the line. So what I'm doing is using the Master Assistant to be able to make any adjustments that it recommends, and then I will change them accordingly here. So let's go ahead and run through each section here of the recommendations that it made for me, and that way you can see what we need to do. So starting with the EQ. So it looks on the first band, we're doing negative 0.7, very, very subtle. A lot of these moves are, and that's going to be at 21.5. So see, even with all that cutting that we did, we still have some low end that's kind of popping out a bit. So that's why it's doing a little bit of that cut there. At this point, could we go back and change the mix and try to adjust accordingly? Yes. For now, I'm leaving it like how it is. Band number 2. Let's see, we have, it looks like a pretty wide Q, so it's going to be about 0.4 at 64 hertz. So it's actually boosting there at that section. And then let's see, band number 3, we have 0.5, and this is at 570, so giving it a little bit more body in the area. And then lastly, this is going to be the last band. This is going to be an increase of 0.1, and this is going to be at 19,000 hertz. So giving it, I guess, a little bit more shimmer, not the reverb, but, just more brightness to the song itself. And then let's move to the dynamics. Dynamics, I believe they're not really even being used. So let me jump over here and make sure. So let me let's play this and make sure. I'm going to turn off the maximizer first. We're just going to go down the line here. Let's hear it. Yeah, so neither of these dynamics are really being used for anything, so we can just turn this off. We don't need that on. So, dynamic EQ. A dynamic EQ is a little bit different. I'm really not the best at explaining it. However, the best way I can attempt to explain it is it's doing something in the middle between what an EQ and a compressor will do. You're selecting a specific frequency area, and then you're setting a threshold to be able to pull frequencies down at that time. It's similar to like a multi-band compressor, but it works a little bit different. So what I will do here, again, because the mix breakdown is more of showing you the specific settings that I'm using rather than what a mix is. And again, this is also using the mastering system. So I'm kind of putting a lot of trust into Ozone. What I'm going to do is just show you what the settings are that is recommended. So it's band 1 analog. We have a peak bell. It's, let's see, negative 21.3. And the frequency is going to be 187. All right, next band, also analog. I think they're all analog. They are, so we'll just move on from there. And they're all peak except for the last one. So band 3, we have, let's see, 444 hertz, negative 26.9. Band number 4 is negative 27 on the threshold, and the frequency is 5,350. And then the last band is going to be a threshold of negative 33, and this is going to be at 12,200. So let's take a listen to what this is doing now. We'll turn it off and turn it back on. Excellent. So as you can probably see there, it's doing a lot of what I was trying to do with the multi-band compressor, where it's trying to tame, especially it sounds like the snare. When the snare is hitting, that low body is just trying to pull those frequencies down so that way it's not so abrupt. All right, so lastly, we have our maximizer. This is my warning to you. It's going to get loud now. So if you need to turn down your volume, go ahead and do that, okay? We have, let's see, the mode set to IRC4. It's on classic. You have these different modes. It's on classic for right now. The ceiling is set to 0.3. Now, depending what platform you're posting your music on, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, whatever it may be, you want to change this accordingly. I just left this at 0.3. Could we do -1 in case there's clipping from the platform that we're uploading to? Yes, we can. I'm just leaving it as is because this is what I was at, and this is how I posted the YouTube video as. So the threshold is -7.9. Characters fast. The character is more set to the fast side of 1.2. Transient 10%, sustain is at 0, and the amount, it looks like we have 25% on the transient emphasis. So that is it. Let's go ahead and take a quick listen to this chorus now. Again, make sure you reduce your volume on your headphones or your monitors. Here we go. Awesome. Great. So congratulations, guys. You finally made it to the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed this. I know that you guys have been requesting this. I hope you like the format, how I did it. Believe it or not, this is my 4th time trying to record this video. Me learning a lot of new things like Adobe Premiere, and then just how to even record Pro Tools, do a video capture all at the same time. So it takes a lot of time and effort. With that being said, I only ask to show your appreciation to please subscribe, like, leave comments too. And not just comments about like, oh, hey, great job or whatever, but leave comments on things that you would like to see or improvements. And that way I can take that as constructive criticism to be able to try to improve the channel and give you content that you want. So just to let you know as well, I'm going to be doing more covers. As you might have seen, I've done a Polyphia piano cover. I'll have a link to that in the description as well. Or I'll have it somewhere in the YouTube video area where you can click on it if you want to hear that as well. So there'd be a bunch more content coming out. Obviously, I'll be posting more MIDI tracks and multi-tracks for you to be able to practice with. And yeah, there'll be more mixed breakdowns going on. In fact, probably the best question to ask you would be, what song have I done already that you would like to see a mixed breakdown for? That would be a great one to do. I might even make a poll of it as well. Now, what I was originally planning on doing was playing the full mix for you to be able to hear it. However, because of YouTube and with copyrights, I won't be able to play the full mix here in this video, only because, again, it will have this video demonetized. And as you can tell, this video is an hour and a half long, took a lot of work to do. So I'd like to be able to keep this thing eligible for monetization. So what I'm simply going to do is here in the YouTube video, there'll be a card somewhere where you can go ahead and click. That will be a link to the original video that I posted where you can hear the full mix. And also there'll be a link down below in case you don't see the card as well. So again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. And you guys have a great day. Be sure again to subscribe, like, comment, give me all those details. Have a great day, guys.